Hello, everybody! You're listening to The Survivor Brothers, the ultimate unofficial podcast from your friends at TV Guide. I'm your Survivor-obsessed host, Fox Van Allen, and joining me today is not Lance Cartelli. He is out today. He is off either at Applebee's or trying to. I believe he heard that Annalise Talavera is now single, so maybe he's working on that. Also, we don't know where Lance is, but he will be back here next week. But thankfully, this week, we have an absolutely fantastic guest for you. Ladies and gentlemen, please join me in welcoming from Parade and from Raw Has a Podcast. Join me in welcoming Mike Bloom. Hello, Mike.
Hello, Fox. Happy to be an honorary Survivor stepbrother. Am I presuming to step into that position?
Yes.
I know that, Survivor apparently is all about secondhand connections when it comes to keeping people. So hopefully that helps my longevity. If I'm no ex-girlfriend of Dean's, but hopefully that means we can still foster some sort of connection here.
Yeah, we're building some good pre-merge bonds here. Something that may help us out later. I guess our listeners are getting their first look at the new Survivor Brothers here. Lance voted out at the last tribal council. Terrible.
Yeah, he's off I guess he's scouring every chicken farm to look for poor sis. Even though we have a fox in the hen house right here. He should have just looked where it was all along. Yeah,
Lance is trying to find a chicken that looks exactly like him. That is what he's off to. Okay, so we had an absolutely a fantastic episode last night. I want to say probably one of the best tribal councils that I've ever seen. And that didn't even get into the craziness that happened at the vote. We got some great Janet moments. We're going to talk about it all today, right here on the show. But before we get started with the episode, I want to just talk to you a little bit, Mike. First of all, I want you to tell everybody what it is you do, because I love your columns and your interviews that you do at Parade. Like, how long have you been doing? Just let us know what's going on with you.
Well, thank you so much for the kind words. Yeah. The step-brothership has become just so positive in the first few minutes of everything. I'm loving this.
Nothing but love.
So, I've been a lifelong Survivor fan, not necessarily day one, but this is really taking me back, and maybe because the ruminating on the unfortunate passing of Rudy Bosch last week has sort of left me in Borneo mode. But I know that back in the summer of 2000, it was such a popular hit that they actually reran Survivor in the weeks not leading up to it, but in the intervening weeks to get everyone caught up. So I think my first episode was episode 6 of season 1.
Okay.
And then I just sort of caught up on the back catalog, and I was a devotee ever since, and I have become enormously lucky in a myriad of ways. Much like your typical Survivor player, luck is very ingrained into my own Survivor career. I got started Survivor podcasting about 5.5 years ago. At this point. I got started with a podcast called The Survivor Historians, which is still going. It's a very in-depth, lengthy podcast series where we essentially go through the older seasons of Survivor. We talk through the historical context behind it, what the reception was at the time, how it informs future seasons that go past it. And I also happen to get involved as part of the main coterie, the rogues gallery of people that make up the Rob Has a Podcast staff, which for those of you that might not know, I know you had Rob on, I believe, during one of your Big Brother podcasts. But Rob is obviously a two-time Survivor contestant who does ungodly amount of Survivor coverage.
Yes, he does.
Each and every week. And I'm very lucky to be a part of said Survivor coverage. I do a weekly Survivor podcast called the RHAP B&B with a lovely woman by the name of Liana Boris, Bloom and Boris, B&B. We just sort of stumbled upon it, much like your typical Merge Tribe name, where we focus on, really, the B&B focuses on the F and F, the frivolity and fun that comes with Survivor. And that actually started around Survivor 35, which was actually when I started getting involved doing Survivor Exit Press. So I was granted the opportunity to start doing press with Survivor Heroes versus Healers versus Hustlers. This is technically my 5th season, if you count Edge of Extinction, with interviewing these players. And I am incredibly grateful that with this particular season, I got to go out on set to Survivor Island of the Idols. Preseason, I got to interview all the players, got to talk with Jeff, got to meet the 2 idols, Boston Rob and Sandra. I had a reaction very akin to Janet's. This episode just stunned silence for a little while, and I got to see the first few days that really were, now looking back, a great microcosm of this entire pre-merge. Lots of emotions, lots of beautiful stories, and a lot of strategic insanity. So In a manner of speaking, that's sort of been my Survivor resume up to this point. It's a show that I cannot believe, has been so seminal to not only my upbringing, but my digestion of popular culture. And I count, my blessings every single day that I get the opportunity to engage in it in so many ways, including making a new member of a Survivor podcast family right here.
Yeah. I want to say that, going back, I have been listening to Rob, Sister Nina. Rob has a podcast, the entire thing for probably at least 5 years now, if not longer. Trying to think back to when I started, it's hard because it just always seems like it's always been there. But it hasn't, and I really gotta shout out to Rob and shout out to you too, because you're kind of like the OGs of this like Survivor coverage, where I feel like for the longest time in like the beginning of Survivor, like to like Survivor was like not cool. It wasn't cool to do that. And if like you were super into Survivor, it's like it's kind of like like the Survivor sucks and like all that. But like now all of a sudden, like especially with Rob and now that it's being covered by you and Josh Wigler, and like there are all these people out there who kind of like have a Survivor beat now, getting like really in-depth coverage. I think it's fantastic, and if not for you guys, I definitely would not be here doing this. I've got nothing but great things to say to you, and to Rob, and
I mean that's amazingly kind.
Yeah, and love.
I mean, and it's fantastic, and I cannot believe, to your point, that even in the past like 2 or 3 years, how much proliferation of Survivor coverage there's been. Yeah. Whether it's former players in the mold of Rob coming out and doing their own commentary, whether it's other fans who are some of the most astute, smart people I've ever been able to have a conversation with, being able to break down the game. I mean, speaking to a point that you made before, I was someone who was very much, for lack of a better term, a little in the closet when it came to my Survivor fandom. It was something that I watched with my family. They gave up after a certain amount of time. I did not, to the point when I first made my outreach to Rob. I reached out under a pseudonym because I had this paranoid fear of like, what if this gets back to me that, oh, Mike Bloom likes Survivor. And now again, looking back like half a decade where it's become such an integral part of my life in so many ways, I laugh, I scoff at that idea. And the crazy thing is, now that I've been obviously more upfront about all the great work I've gotten to do, there have been people in my life who I didn't realize were Survivor fans who have like come out, in support of the show, saying they've watched it all the time. For example, I just put out a piece with Jamal, really, really great interview where he gave some more background.
It is fantastic, yeah.
Thank you. So he gave some more background and more insight to the discussion he had with Jack last week, and he posted this on Facebook. And one of my close college friends responds being like, "Oh my God, I know this guy." And so just to like watch, again, much like the Kellee and Dean thing, it's a small world somehow. And to watch, people from your life come out in support of something that you really enjoy and really love talking about, when for so long I was so afraid and concerned that it was a part of my personal life that I kept hidden from everyone else. It's a crazy transition. And I'm so happy with just, I don't know, the community that we have found ourselves with today. You cover fantastic. Big Brother. It could be a lot worse in terms of the, especially when discussing some of these heavier issues as we have the past couple of episodes. This is for the most part, a very measured, a very mature, and a very complicated community. And to be able to have the ability to provide an outlet to break down some of these really fascinating and really important issues, it's been a golden opportunity in so many ways.
Yeah, and for sure, like you said, this has been, I want to say, like, I think this season is probably going to go down in history as one of the most important Survivor seasons, regardless of how it turns out in the end and who wins what, because we are dealing with a lot of really big issues, and in a way that Survivor has not dealt with these issues before. Whether it was the conversation last week that we had about between Jack and Jamal, the conversation we had here about all women's alliances and what that means for the game, even what's going on with Dan and the spatial awareness that we've been talking about since the first episode of the season. Like, there are so many really important topics here, and I feel like, just reading some of the comments on the internet, it's making a lot of people uncomfortable, but that's good because it is just addressing so many really important topics. And, regardless of how you feel on these topics, it is so important that we have this conversation. And Survivor is really the perfect place to have this conversation because that's what the game is all about. It's about relationships between people. And I'm really glad to see them handle it in a way this season that you probably would not have seen, in 5 years ago or maybe even a couple seasons ago.
Yeah, it's extremely interesting, and it's interesting especially compared to some of the other ways that they might have highlighted this issues in the past. I know I mentioned Rudy Bosch, but I think that his relationship with Richard Hatch was sort of a way to really approach this idea of internalized homophobia,
right?
And how to receive someone from the LGBTQ community at a time where being out and proud was very few and far between.
Right.
There was Richard Hatch, and then there was like Jack and Will on Will and Grace, and there really wasn't a lot of pictures in terms of homosexual television characters. And you have someone in stark contrast to Richard who, would say on paper, oh, this is the Archie Bunker to his meathead, like he's going to hate him, he's going to vote him out immediately. And not only do they become like close friends, they become the tightest pair in the game. And I would say to this point, still one of the most legendary pairs in Survivor history. Survivor has been, as Jeff vocalizes at the end of this tribal council, I feel like maybe sometimes amidst all the complications that the game has brought about recently, whether it's the focus on strategy or, the induction of idols or numerous advantages into the game, but still at its core, to your point, it's about people.
Yes.
It's about people. And I know it's weird to say like, oh, they're building a society together, but essentially what I've always felt, and actually this was dictated, ironically enough, in a conversation I had with Jamal pre-season, he said it super well, when he essentially was talking about how former players might judge the people on a current season, being like, why aren't you doing this? Why aren't you judging that? And Jamal brought up this great point where he said that it's not up to the audience to dictate the rules of a season. It's up to the 19 or 20 people involved to dictate, what makes a deserving winner, what makes a good game, etc. And that speaks as well from a moral perspective as to, what are the quote unquote rules we've seen in seasons like Survivor Redemption Island, when Boston Rob runs things like a prison and institutes like the buddy system and these very strict rules. There are other times when, more immoral actions can be taken and, they just get laughed off sometimes. It's like, oh, that's Johnny Fairplay, you can't trust him. And it seems in this case, and we can certainly talk about whether or not it is emblematic of the age that we live in, as Jeff has sort of ascribed to it, but this seems like a group of people in particular that, from the backgrounds they come from, they have certain opinions because they all have a certain identity. And their identity, no matter if you think that when you enter the Survivor game, you have sort of a blank slate of things, perception is reality. And I think that, unfortunately, based on certain pillars of identity, you might have certain misconceptions or stereotypes based upon you as a first impression. And I feel like these are moments to sort of talk about it. Are they a little more, I would say, not blatant, but I'd say maybe a little more underlined than those relationships like the Rudy and Rich thing? Absolutely. But I mean, to your point, considering the feedback from some of the audience, maybe that communication style might be necessary in this day and age. For example, when we live in an age of social media that is all about really making statements and, giving reasonable explanations to them, there are certain times when these conversations where it felt like these contestants were almost talking to the camera in addition to talking about the game. And I can understand why some people might have issue with that if it comes to this idea of, basing the conversations in reality and naturalism. But when it comes to the actual content and intent behind it, it's something that I really, really value, especially, 39 seasons into the show, the fact that it is able to take on issues, such timely issues, in such a well-measured and very articulate way just across the board from this cast is fantastic.
Yeah, and I think you can really, the type of comment that Jack made last week really could have, depending on how the show handles it and how Jack handles it and how the people around him handles it, it could have just cast like such a bad light on this season. And if we were thinking back about like Big Brother season 15, or maybe going back to Survivor, maybe One World and Colton, and just like the way, like I'm really glad that Jack handled it the way he did, Jamal handled it the way he did. We got such a valuable conversation there. That seemed to bring them even closer together. That was like one of my questions last week. Like it's got to affect the game, but how? And it really seems like it did bring them closer together. And I really, I'm so into these conversations. And I love that they're having it. And I love that the culture of this Lairo tribe, is just like allowing these conversations to happen. And, like you said, if it was a different season and a different group of people, maybe we wouldn't be having these kind of conversations or the quality that we're having here. I know there's some people who are like really about the people who are playing and not about the tribes, like, Lairo, Vokai, whatever. But I think the tribe dynamics, like, I know I act as a different person when I'm, say, at work versus when I'm hanging out with my friends, or like, it's just the group of people that you're with really helps shape who you are. And it's like, it's such an important part of the game. So yeah.
Well, yeah, and I think that, look, as an example, at that tribal council, on two ends, you have Kellee and you have Janet, and they both make really interesting points about, and we'll certainly get into it, both the concept of a women's alliance and its history in Survivor, as well as just the role and the bolstering of women in today's day and age. But here are two women who I feel could not be less similar. You have a 20-something person from Philadelphia/California who just moved to business school after deciding to move on from a medical profession, and you have a near 60-year-old woman who has been a lifeguard basically her entire life. Yet they both come together around this idea of like, yeah, we both have this experience where we have been judged for our gender. Or even looking on the other tribe, we see it very briefly in the beginning of this episode, but the Lauren-Missy connection is so interesting to me. Yeah. Lauren told me in the preseason, when I asked her, I asked all the contestants, what's the type of person that you would want to be your closest ally? And Lauren was one of the people to literally point someone out. And she said, I want to stick the other black girl here. And you wonder exactly why that might be, but it's because I think that they have an unconsciously shared experience in terms of the role of a woman of color in this day and age. And even though, they might come from completely different lifestyles, completely different parts of the country, that is something that they can find common ground around. And we got, a bit about that relationship in the beginning of this episode. But yeah, true to Lauren's prediction, it ended up becoming a really close bond.
Yeah, I think this is we keep talking about like getting into this episode. Let's do it. And I think you've provided the perfect segue here, because one of the first scenes that we do get is this, the aftermath at Vokai last week. We lost Jason at a very intense tribal council. And we do see this, I feel like the biggest moment that we get in this aftermath is this Lauren and Missy moment where, Lauren feels really hurt. Like she thought that they had something going together, and Missy is like, yes, for sure we do. Like, I can't, I've been going back and forth on Missy, because I first of all, Lance and I absolutely loved her in the preseason. And in the first several episodes that we saw, it was like Missy seems to be doing everything right. And then last episode, we were kind of like, okay, it looks like Missy was making some mistakes, but it looks like I loved everything I saw out of Missy in this episode, where she's kind of she's selling Lauren at like you can't go home. Like we have to, like, I need you for my game. And like I always like think like it's so hard to trust like what's going on in Survivor, but I feel like the one thing that you can always kind of assume is that someone else is going to do whatever's best for their game. And I do like that. Like it does make a lot of sense that they want to stick together. And then we saw it at the immunity challenge, not to get ahead of ourselves, but they shared like, okay, like they had like this great moment where they're like hugging it, like, okay, now let's win the game. And it really seems like we didn't see a lot of them working together in previous episodes, but for sure it looks like they are, right?
Yeah, I mean, that's my assumption at this moment. And I mean, going into this merge, I mean, it got increasingly complicated by what just happened at Lairo in this most recent tribal council. But that is, you can look on paper and say, okay, is it original Vokai versus original Lairo? But there's so many little duos, both intertribal and intra-tribal. And, Lauren and Missy is an example of the latter, where if it's Vokai versus Lairo, it might be a case where one's going to look out for the other one on the other side. Maybe it's going to be a bit more of a secretive relationship, even though it does seem like, someone like Elizabeth or even, Jason, who I was speaking about last week, it was sort of, I guess, apparent that Missy and Lauren at least had a bond going on. That comment about, you can't go home from my game is so interesting, because I feel like when it comes, I mean, it has a great chance, and depending on delivery, of like being very conceited,
right,
of being like, well, you can't go home from my game, because like that essentially that might have a context of like, I'm controlling you, like you're a number for me. But Missy is able to spin it in a surprisingly comforting way, and I think that, to your point, if we're talking about the culture of this season outside of the actual cultural material, this cast is extremely cutthroat because they're all operating out of a sense of self-preservation so early on. Yeah. It's almost like they're playing a post-merge game in the pre-merge, and I think that's what's led to like so much craziness. And I think, Lauren and Missy are able to connect over that. Whereas maybe if Missy had said that with another cast, they might have said, oh my God, I'm so offended by that. Am I a passenger instead of a pilot? But here, Lauren can sort of say, okay, you know what? I had my big cutthroat move. I got rid of Molly. You had your big cutthroat move. You got rid of Jason. But the thing is, we're going to look out for each other because we're best for each other's game. And it's sort of like that game respects game mentality that I think is really driving a lot of the action this season. Yeah. And I think part of it also is that it is Missy who is delivering it. And that's just like, she's got that, very A-type personality. And, of like, it just comes, it just feels okay coming from her, like in this moment, like in maybe a way it wouldn't with someone else. I don't know, but I really like Missy, and I'm very excited to see how she plays in the merge. I've been very nervous for her over the last few episodes because she is in a tough position if you consider just the basic Vokai versus Lairo numbers. But maybe that's not going to be as big of a deal as it has been in some past seasons, I feel like the more modern Survivor is, less of the stick together with your original tribe, despite, everybody saying, oh, Vokai strong, Lairo strong. And for like each season, it seems like more and more people are looking out for themselves earlier and earlier. And the game is getting faster. It is getting very fast. It got so fast that everybody skipped that first move, the first move to get rid of Karishma. Everybody skipped it and went straight to the bigger move. And no one ever got back to that initial move. And now it looks like she is in a great position moving forward. Maybe not to win the game, but definitely to go far because she does not seem like a threat. Yeah, I mean, to have Karishma, Noura, and Dean all make the merge is pretty ridiculous considering the very precarious positions that they had all been in. And to your point, I think it just speaks to how a lot of these people really, I know that Aaron has put this mentality of like, I play 2 or 3 moves ahead, but I really do feel like, ironically enough, they're playing a lot like one of our idols this season. They're playing very day to day. They're basically playing with the mentality as long as it's not me. Yeah. They're basically like, hey, throw out a name. Maybe they'll have 1 or 2 people that they're like, I'm going to try to look out for. But at the end of the day, it's all about self-preservation, even in a tribal stage where you really try to balance the group mentality versus the individual mentality. That really seems to be less of the case this time around, considering that, to your point, it continually targeted as a weak link. Maybe that's not necessarily accurate, but at least being painted as a weak link, Karishma makes it through to the merge. Yeah. Yeah, and to go back to Aaron, I feel like a couple episodes ago he was saying something about how you need to think a couple steps ahead, and like you said, it really does seem like it's more of a in the moment game that he's playing, despite that he says he's looking several moments ahead. And I think you see it a little bit in this episode where it's just like it's all about like, okay, we've got the numbers now, like I feel great because it's 4-3, but it's got to be, if you're thinking like 1 or 2 steps ahead,
you know the merge is probably going to come at 13 because it usually does, and that there's really, you got like maybe one more tribal council. I mean, great, you made the merge, but like that power dynamic that you're so excited about really isn't going to exist for much longer, and you might not be able to do anything with it, as is the case here. You know, they had that, you know, they were talking about, you know, maybe going after Tommy. And nothing happened with it because they didn't go back to tribal, and they won't have that chance again because now the numbers are back with the Vokai people having the numbers and with Tommy having friends. So it's not so easy anymore.
Yeah, and it's an interesting question. I know it's certainly been asked as to, okay, conventional wisdom says, okay, throw the challenge if you are old Lairo, new Vokai, because you just can very easily, you have a 4-3 majority right now. But obviously, you know, I guess easier said than done. This seems to be, in addition to a very cutthroat group, a very athletically stacked group. Yeah. And considering if you have professional athlete Elizabeth, you know, a very competitive Missy, and, you know, a very physically competitive Aaron, as well as the three, like, and Elaine really leading the tribe, you know, they might not necessarily have that losing mentality. On top of, they might feel like if they throw the challenge and they vote out one of Dan, Lauren, or Tommy, most likely Tommy, that's going to completely sever the relationships with the other two Vokai. Whereas maybe if they win the challenge, they're going to have another day of relaxation and safety. As Lauren says, bonding is like 95% of Survivor. They can make those bonds. So, hey, even if Lairo is down 7-6 at the merge, there's a slight connection that they can make that is more bolstered than it would if they had thrown the challenge and said, okay, we're definitely against you. We have to get rid of one of your people. And okay, we'll see you at the merge. Probably not going to work with you anymore.
Yeah, no, I like that you, I like that you, you mentioned the possibility of throwing it here, because that was like in the back of my mind. Like, does it make sense to do that here? Because it's, like I said, it's 4-3, and it's probably the only chance you're going to have for the rest of the game to make a kind of move like this. But like you said, there are so many physical people, and it's, even Tommy, who's been fantastic in challenges this episode.
Oh yeah, well, I mean, he's
not throwing it.
Yes,
he got very intense this episode. Let's go.
Yeah, put the thing in, and then when they put the puzzle together, he's like laying down on it, despite the fact that it's covered in people's muddy shoes. Like, you could tell that his, I mean, you saw he like cries nearly at one point in the episode, because just the idea of him going home, and I love Lauren just being like, basically saying, suck it up, Buttercup, for the umpteenth time, and being like, okay, we got to get down to business. But yeah, I could imagine, and, you know, hopefully I'll have the chance to talk with all these people at some point down the line, but I could imagine that maybe the idea of not throwing the challenge was about this idea of making social inroads, knowing there was a merge coming up. You know, you're preparing for the merge. You can do it one of two ways. You can either make the strategic move, throw the challenge, get rid of another Vokai to really try to even up the numbers, or you can say, all right, then I know the merge is coming up. Let me, A, guarantee my safety, and B, use this time to make some inroads to help my chances down the line. So it's much like this lesson on IOI. It's a calculated risk.
Yes. We see again over there, just to finish up on Vokai before we move on to the Island of the Idols. It looks like we talked a little bit about, mentioned quickly about Dan. And we get another scene. Apparently Dan likes to, you know, limbs are everywhere, Elizabeth says. And everybody seems to bond around that. And Lauren and Tommy are really pitching hard this idea that, like, Dan, like, they already sense that, like, people are a little uncomfortable with Dan, and they're throwing him under the bus, coming up with some stories that he's going after Aaron. I like that Lauren is, you know, thinking about, you know, that she's got this relationship with Tommy and other people might see it, and that's a problem, and trying to work it. But, you know, kudos to Missy for seeing right through that. You know, and one of the reasons why I love Missy as a player, like, she really does think about these scenarios.
Yeah, I mean, she really has her BS radar is like always pinging. And I will definitely commend the move on Lauren and Tommy's part as well, because what we've learned, and what I certainly learned from my exit interview with Jason last week, is that, I mean, the plan on the original Vokai's part was to blindside Aaron. The plan was that originally the 4 original Vokai were really going to put forward this idea of rocks while convincing Aaron to flip, And then what they would do was turn their 4 votes onto Aaron. So it would make 4 votes for Aaron, 1 vote for Elaine, 3 votes for, I guess, let's say Jason. And they would be able to get a plurality of votes, send home an original Lairo, still keep things divided where, Missy intended to flip and now Elizabeth and Elaine know that, so they can maintain those numbers. So that was a plan. And now that Jason's gone, they are very easily they know that information. Obviously, Aaron and the others don't. So they were able to, it's not necessarily a lie. They were able to, I think, bring up this narrative and, hoist it onto Dan. And I think that it's a good idea, just on paper for it to happen. Yeah. But like you said, when you're dealing with someone like Missy, who I think was able to, A, maybe pick up on something was fishy, but B, use this as her opportunity. Like, she might believe that the Dan thing is true, but that doesn't matter to her. It doesn't matter to her that they were thinking of getting rid of Aaron. For her, what matters right now is let me keep my bond with Lauren, and a great way to do that. And, we've seen people like Russell Hantz do this before to more middling effect, but it's this idea of like, let me get rid of my number one. Let me get rid of Tommy, the comfort blanket, as she says, so it's going to drive Lauren further into her arms. I don't know if that would have been the case had they actually gone through with it, but it's a very interesting counter move by Missy, and admittedly it is pretty badass to have Lauren and Tommy plan this entire thing. They think they go through it flawlessly. Cut to Missy and Elizabeth being like, no, we're still gonna vote out Tommy.
Yeah, no, it's fantastic. It is absolutely fantastic. Okay, so I do want to get into this Island of the Idols and what's going on in the Lairo tribe, and we're gonna do that right after this. Okay, so we are back, and as promised, I wanna go start talking about Lairo here. It is an interesting tribe, and it is a miserable tribe when we first get our look. Karishma's wet, everybody's wet. Did you like that little edit that they did with Karishma? I really like that edit. That was
so
great.
Much fun. I mean, first of all, it was straight out of a horror movie. Like, you could have cut to her dead underneath that poor basket. But it's a great representation of the elements. I mean, my assumption is she was sitting there, wet and miserable, in that same position all night,
right?
And so it's almost like a time-lapse camera of just on one person. And yeah, I mean, it is, as we've known from previous odd number Survivor seasons in Fiji, the weather can get nasty around that March, April time of year. I was very lucky that when I went out, it was unseasonably beautiful. It only rained a couple of times, and it wasn't anything like crazy or intense. Certainly not like the big typhoons that we've gotten the past couple seasons.
Right.
But I mean, the misery that we saw from that scene was palpable, but that also really segues nicely into a lot of the behavior going around at camp, specifically, I think the grouchiness on both Jamal and Kellee's parts.
Yeah, I think you're right about that. I mean, it's hard to fake being happy and cheerful when you're wet and cold and miserable. It looks like they're just like sleeping on the ground too. I mean,
I'm pretty sure the Lairo camp, they pretty much said like they had. When I visited, they had built a little bit of a floor. I think they had sort of given up on that. They probably said that I've heard bad things about sleeping on bamboo, that sometimes people decide to sleep on the ground and deal with the stuff that might crawl over them because it's actually softer than the bamboo. And it looks like Lairo eventually decided to do that, much to the former Vokai's chagrin. And I guess, unfortunately, another externality is that when it rains, the dirt turns to mud, and so you're sleeping in the mud.
Yeah, that did not look great, and that can't help just like being ready for an immunity challenge and going into there. I mean, Lairo's had enough trouble all season long, and just to have like such a tough camp life has got to really just kind of magnify those problems.
Yeah, and I mean, Kellee says it here. She's like, I am someone who usually does not deal with incompetence, but you add hunger and sleeplessness onto that, and it really makes the tempers flare. And again, I feel like from both sides. I mean, Jamal had this beautiful edit the previous episode, but Fox, it is just so freaking hot and cold, where
Yes.
Jamal, I think, I'll say, I think he acts like kind of an a-hole in the beginning of this episode.
Yeah, yeah, yeah. It was Lance and I talked about it. Back before he got blindsided, that it seemed like like there was like a certain arrogance to his game. Just not bringing your stuff to tribal counts because you feel so safe, and just like a few things that we'd seen from him, and it seemed like all of a sudden like there was a complete turnaround where he was just much. But now again, like in this episode, now that's raining, he says it himself that he feels really safe. He hasn't felt this safe in a very long time, and maybe that's why it's coming out again. Maybe that's part of it. Combined with the rain and combined with not getting enough food, and we see obviously there's a food moment here where he comes at Noura a little bit for having there's not you got too much rice there, or with Kellee and the flint and not letting her take a shot at it. It's a rough look for Jamal. Especially again losing another ally tonight, or last night, I guess.
Yeah, and an idol at that.
Yeah.
So I mean, when it comes to approaches in the game, there's this idea that I've always thought about with Survivor. It's basically a duality of content versus intent. And when it comes to Survivor, and we actually spoke about this a bit with Missy and Lauren's approach, intent is so much more vital than content is. Most of the time in games like this, it's not necessarily what you say, but it's the tone and emotion with which you say it. And I think the thing with Jamal is, again, if you take the things that he said, telling Noura like, oh yeah, the rice is smaller because you put in a smaller portion.
Right.
And you maybe put on a different tone to it, and maybe it takes on maybe something more jocular, or maybe something more, I don't know, pleasant. I don't want to say it was an unpleasant tone, but I think it was maybe a bit more argumentative, or maybe a bit more confrontational. And I think that unfortunately the tone that he took was something that really, I mean, Noura was not a huge fan of his to begin with,
right.
But I know Kellee, there was a weird situation where, Kellee, when Jack says, hey, Kellee should use the flint, Kellee does respond with like, sure, whatever. And I could see from Jamal's perspective, if he takes that to mean, okay, that means that she doesn't really want to do it, and Jack's sort of making her do it. But it's very clear that I think maybe just the mood that she's in has made her give a low energy response when she really does want to do it, and it does tick her off when as she starts getting into it, Jamal is like, okay, do you want me to take over? And I could, from his perspective, it's less about stepping in and more so relieving her of duty, feeling like she's doing something that she doesn't want to do. But from Kelly's perspective, and I think from our perspective, it's very much, hey, he wanted to do this all along, and to the point where when somebody else does it, he wants to take the job back.
Right. And it really puts him in a bad spot here with Kellee and Noura. They both do not like what they're hearing, and Noura for sure makes this pitch again about this trying to get a women's alliance going, and talking with Janet about this. And while it seems like maybe he's rubbing Janet the wrong way as well, she at least believes that it is not the right time, that she does not want to go after Jamal here. She wants to stick together through the merge with Jamal, and sees him as a better target after the fact. So what do you think about this? Where would you be if you were on this tribe? Like, is someone like would you want to make the move against Jamal here? Or would you want to stay, Vokai strong and do what you can, as far as, maybe not making the idle play here and sticking with Dean and making the safe move, right?
Yeah, I mean, it's tough because, I think it depends on your interpersonal relationship. I had the opportunity to talk with Jack shortly before we're speaking right now, and, he told me that he and Jamal and Jamal and Janet, were very, very close. And so that gives a bit more perspective as to Janet's reticence to end up voting out Jamal, because I feel like she says, yeah, voting out Jamal would be good for your game because you don't like each other, but I personally like him, so I don't see any reason to get rid of him. And they thought that they had Kellee in on that plan, but it does seem like Kellee and I definitely want to put a pin in that because I have an interesting theory as to why Kellee does what she does that maybe connects a bit more as to what ended up happening last episode.
Okay, well, I definitely want to hear that, and we will come back to that. But speaking of Janet, this is kind of a Janet episode here. We got a lot of fun with Janet here because she goes to the Island of the Idols for a lesson about calculated risk. Where she is going to play a game, and we really don't get too much information about the game. Because...
I saw I saw 3 pieces in Rob's hands. It's 2 yellow, 1 red. Honestly, knowing some of the challenges that have been used in previous seasons, it honestly could have been a simple game as like, I'm going to shuffle these behind my back and I'm going to pick one. If it's the red one, you win. Yeah. You know? Yeah. So it's I guess the action was less about playing the game, and it was more so about making the choice to play the game.
Yeah, and I again, I really like I loved what I saw from Janet here, and you know, Rob loves it too, where she's thinking about and thinking about the risk, and it's not even the calculated risk that she's thinking is not necessarily based around the game itself, but it's based around the reward that she would get if she won the game, which is I guess a safety without power. Which is something new, which I really like this concept. I think this is an interesting concept, a way to do immunity, but a little bit differently, where it's not only is she safe, but she has to miss out on an entire tribal council. She stays home, everyone else goes, so she doesn't vote. And she's thinking like, oh boy, this could really screw things up. Like, what happens if my alliance needs me? Like, she's thinking, I love the way she's thinking here. And just like, she's the first person, not the first person to say no, but like the first person to like just be like she just had such a great handle on the decision.
Yeah, and I think that some of the best twists to me in Survivor are the ones that bring opportunities of choice to the player. So even at the outset, the safety with a power twist is very interesting in that, you know, it really is this risk-reward thing of, okay, you keep yourself safe, but at the same time, you miss out on a tribal council, and tribal council could serve as a form of bonding. Something crazy could happen at tribal council that wouldn't have happened if you were there, so you might have some guilt, you might take the blame for it, especially in a stage like this where it is a little tribalistic of old Vokai versus old Lairo. And, you know, in this case, sometimes people take these deals because they feel like they're in a comfortable position where even if they lose their vote, it's going to be fine. But Janet is in such a comfortable position that she feels she doesn't need to do this. You know, I guess compare her situation to Elaine's from last week, where Elaine's like, hell yeah, I'm going to do it no matter what it is, right, because we're looking down the barrel of rocks here, and I want to try to do something to help our situation. Janet's in what she looks at right now is a 5-2 majority on this tribe. She's basically looking at the merge right now, and she does not want any funny business. She wants to mitigate any sort of funny business that might happen. So while this might guarantee her getting to the merge, what also might guarantee her to the merge is to play it safe and, you know, make sure that she's there at tribal council.
Yeah, I love the move that she made here. It feels like a very Janet move. You know, when she comes back and, you know, talks to the tribe, you know, it's a very matter of fact that, you know, I decided not to play the game, and, you know, we don't get any like reactions from people saying like, oh yeah, she's telling the truth. Oh yeah, she's lying. We get reactions,
but to a very different thing.
Yeah. But I feel like it's just so believable coming from her. Like, you wouldn't expect her to make this gamble that could potentially hurt her and the tribe. Like, it just makes total sense for her, and like that's one of the reasons why you would want to work with Janet, because she is just like you know what you're getting. You know she's not the type of person who is going to stab you in the back at like the, you know, just right, just in a heartbeat. You know, if she's coming for you, there's a good reason, and it's not going to be just something that just like doesn't make sense.
Yeah, I mean, she very much shares that capability with someone like Noura or even someone like Tom. What you see is what you get. Mm-hmm. And maybe unlike somebody like Noura, who can come off as a bit flighty, Janet is somebody who, maybe due to, you know, the way that she comes across, is a bit more reliable. It also helps bolster her own story and Kelly's story, that it was the same narrative. Doesn't hurt that she made quite the entrance on the boat ride back. Never thought I would see that side of Janet. And I literally like screamed, not like screamed, but like when I saw that happen, because it was just so out of nowhere. But I mean, I was so happy to get so much Janet this episode. I felt like with this cast, with these remaining 13 people, I feel like we know at least a little bit about each person, which is a great sign of a great pre-merge. And I felt like Janet maybe might have been that last missing piece of the puzzle, but we finally were able to push that in. All the edges have lined up, and now we have a good picture at least as to what we think these 13 people are, Janet included.
You make a great point here. There's no one here that is, as they might say, purple. Everybody has gotten some screen time here. I feel like I know a little bit about everybody that is currently in the game. There's no one in there that's like really like, I don't know what their game, or I don't know why they're there. I don't know how they're going to play the game moving forward. I think you've got like enough clues about everybody, and that's great. Like I feel like we don't often get that, and it makes it a lot more enjoyable for me as someone who can often like, okay, they're not showing this person and they're not showing that person, so they're not going to win the game, because if they were going to win the game, we would know who they are by the time we get to the merge, right? So like I feel like it's better, first of all, because like I want to learn about these people, but second of all, because it makes it a little bit harder to see where the season is going.
Yeah, and that's the thing, is that, look, are there certainly people that I think we could discount from winning? Absolutely.
Oh, I got a list.
I still think that's the case, but to your point, it's not going to be due to lack of airtime.
Right.
I think it just might be due to place in the game. And I mean, this season is still so up in the air for me, because I mean, if we look at conventional quote unquote winners edits, which, is basically parlance for a lot of Survivor winners have been edited in this way, where they are strategically competent and complicated and almost always neutral to positive. You're not going to really see any huge mistakes that the winner makes. But I feel like we've been seeing, especially this season, more of a warts and all edit, to the point where, like, I don't know. I still don't know if I can count out Jamal as a winner, despite how insanely up and down. Even someone like Missy, who like had, you have episode 1, she's like, yeah, I survived a brain tumor. It's an insane story. Episode 4, you have her sort of like going power crazy.
Yeah.
I like this fact that they are complicating things, not only to give us, I think, more truth as to what happened on the island, this idea that one day you're up and next day you're down, but also to keep the viewers on your toes. So we're not sitting there waiting for, we're not waiting for the Dahmer Wendell coronation edit.
Right.
We still have a good amount of people viable, because we don't know exactly if this is going to be a conventionally edited story or not.
Right. And I think a lot with, just going back to last season, Edge of Extinction, how everything was up in the, like, no one saw that coming.
Yeah.
But then again, like, you got to think, like, how do you edit that to, like, it's hard to make a way for anyone to see that coming, because it's just such an unbelievable ending. But yeah, like here we've got quite a few people who are in it, have a good chance of winning still, that you might otherwise have counted out in other seasons. A few people who probably are not going to win the game for sure. But at least we're getting something from everybody. And I think that's really the best you can hope for here.
Yeah, I mean, with this cast, I mean, granted, I might have some bias because I got out to interview these people, but I feel like it's been a season of killing your darlings, where, to be quite honest, whenever we get to Tribal Council and a certain amount of people are on the short list to go, I'm like, I don't want to see any of them go. Even someone like Jack, who I think may have played a more minor role in this season, especially compared to his closer ally, Jamal, he is such a freaking sweet kid. To be quite honest, probably one of the sweetest people I've ever had a conversation with. He is so good-natured and well-intentioned that even to see him go was like, oh, my heart goes out to you.
Yeah.
It's tough to do, and especially because they all want it. Even some people who might not be as well-versed in the game, or this might not be their diehard dream that they've had for years, they still have this passion to get to the end there and survive another 3 days on the island. And again, that certainly comes out in the choices that they make.
Yeah. And for sure, they're going for it, and I love when they go for it. So I want to talk a little bit about the immunity challenge here. It looks like Dean kind of gets lucky again, where it's just like the third like basketball shooting challenge.
See, you would say that, but you have like Dean, Missy played basketball.
Yeah.
Tommy, I think, currently plays
That's
basketball.
true. Yes,
Jamal,
Tommy has been crushing these basketball segments for sure.
I think Jamal, played basketball in high school. I think he was someone who, as you and as you guys pointed out last week, certainly helped with Dean to actually secure that surprise win for Lairo. So it's weird, I think there certainly has been some commentary. It's like, wow, they're really making people shoot things into baskets, but maybe they feel like there's enough people on the season that they can designate people to do it. I'll be very intrigued to see now that we get to the individual portion, like what exactly they're going to do, knowing maybe some of the skill sets of some of these people.
Yeah. It's a relatively simple immunity challenge, at least as far as the team challenges go, because there's often there are no ropes to untie. It's just coconuts and then a puzzle and we're done.
Though I mean, I don't know, maybe it's because of the just intensity of Vokai with the puzzle, whether it was, Lauren being able to lead the tribe, except for when Elaine is just that voice in the corner being like, it ain't right. And then she ends up being, the Grecian Cassandra of it all when it turns out that they're wrong. And I mean, this was, for my money, this might be like the closest immunity challenge finish we've had since the finale of Heroes versus Villains, when it was like, if you remember, when it was like the blindfold challenge, and it was Russell and Jerry and Parvati all going for the final necklace at the same time, and they were like all literally on top of each other. Like, had Lairo just like inched that puzzle piece in, it was sticking out of its final resting place when the challenge finished. Like, that is crazy to me.
Yeah, it's like one of the where it's so close. I mean, you can like sometimes the way they edit it, where like sometimes you can tell like the challenge isn't really close, and like it's like back and forth where you're seeing a shot and then they show the other tribe, but the shot from the other tribe is clearly like 3 minutes ago, where they're like trying to like make it look like it's close. But this is like legitimately close, and there are just so many, because that piece wasn't like a last second piece. It was like that for a while, and it's just such a heartbreaker to like that close. But on the opposite side, like for Vokai, people who won that, I mean, that was, Tommy invested so much into that challenge, because I mean he knows he's on the line. Like he knows it's his neck probably like more than Lauren or Dan. So he wants it that bad, but that's why put the thing in, let's go. Like he was so intense in like a way like he has not been intense in past challenges.
He's someone who was like very much playing up, I just want to be chill, I want to go with the flow, and like seeing Tommy on the bottom is seeing a really interesting side of Tommy, because we're seeing Tommy a bit more emotional. And he is an emotional person. I've talked with him, and like he is someone who's very capable of that. I think it's one of those things of like classic Survivor characterization of how you are on the top versus how you are on the bottom. And some people act the same way. Some people change up a bit. And I wouldn't say that Tommy was necessarily cocky when he was in a position of power, but it's interesting to see how straight-laced he was when he felt comfortable in a majority and felt like he had a handle on the game, and when he doesn't, like you see that desperation eke through, and it's really interesting to watch. He is he's such a complex character. I really enjoy Tommy, and I think he's got he's gonna go deep into this game. I mean, if I have to choose someone who I think is probably the most likely to win at this point, I would say it's probably Tommy. I think there are a few other people in the mix, but like I just think like he's got some really good relationships. He was in some trouble here in these last couple episodes, but now that he's come out on the other side, we're merging next episode, so going to be back with the numbers. That could turn out badly for him, of course. Like it could, but it seems like the worst may be behind him. And I'm really, really excited to see what he does moving forward. What Tommy will we get next? Yeah, I mean, we'll see, because I mean, I think usually what happens with people like Tommy of the Athletic Builds is, the typical thing is, okay, vote them out as soon as we get to the merge because they have a chance of winning challenges. But it does seem like we spoke about before, I think trust is really superseding physicality.
Yeah.
And we'll see when, the merge happens and physicality becomes much more of a weakness than a strength, if that's still going to hold. If people are like, yeah, he could win a bunch of immunities at the end, but you know what? He is a reliable number for me, so let me keep him. Whereas maybe in other seasons, they wouldn't necessarily do that.
Yeah. Yeah, very, very well. And for sure that he is a very physical player, but I don't hear a lot of conversation about that. Maybe there is conversation. We're only getting 60 minutes per episode, and after commercials,
right.
It's like 45. We want 90-minute episodes. That's what Lance and I want. We want challenge length episodes, so we get more information. But we'll see how that goes. In the immunity challenge, we talked about that Missy and Lauren moment that was fantastic, but. The end result here is Lairo, despite so close, they still go to tribal council again. And it looks like, Dean, number one on the chopping block. It makes perfect sense, right? Why wouldn't it be Dean?
Yeah, I mean, because, if you're looking at, even if it's just like a Dean versus Karishma thing, Karishma very much benefited from essentially being the one to sell out Lairo first.
Right.
Even if Dean was going to do it as well, like she immediately went to them and she really planted this bug in their head of like, you cannot trust Dean. Apparently he's not good at eye contact, which I know that Noura, and Noura even spoke about this with me preseason when I asked her, like, who do you want to, thinking about joining up with? She's like, I'm really treasuring the people that I'm making eye contact with. Eye contact means so much to someone like her. And so when Dean doesn't do something like that, even in last episode when he's proposing this deal with him, like, he's just looking somewhere else. And even though it might just be like maybe he spotted something interesting on the horizon, that's distrusting to her. And, if we were heaping praise onto Janet for sort of staying the course, I'll give it to Noura here as well. There's even a secret scene this week where she says, look, I do want to vote out Jamal, but Dean is someone who makes logical sense to get rid of at this point. So at this moment, it looks like Dean's going, and Detective Dean is none the wiser at this point. Like, he is, I do love this edit of Dean where it really just seemed like he's not in the know a lot.
Yes.
He hasn't been in the know in quite some time. And we see it here where he's like, they're going to have to be really good actors for them to get one over on me. And yeah, it turns out that they are. We have not yet seen the award-winning performance that will come at Tribal Council.
Yeah. I can't figure out why Dean doesn't see it coming, because it should be so clear that it's coming. Like, it really should be. It seems like he does have Dean has a good relationship with Jamal and Jack. But it seems like his relationships with the women on the tribe are lacking. He said with Noura, a couple weeks ago, we saw it with Janet, where Janet was calling him out, where he said he's making conversation with everybody, and he's like, you haven't come to me. I think there's a couple people that he trusts are telling him one thing, but he hasn't built these relationships with this other half of the tribe, and he's got no relationship with Karishma. So that's already 3.
Yeah, it's interesting because, again, if we're talking about this idea of content versus intent, we have Janet say earlier in the episode that she feels he's kind of like full of himself. And I think Jamal is going to say at this point of like, oh, Dean's a little smarmy. And again, he could not be intending that whatsoever. He's a very nice guy. It could just be that the way he's presenting himself, whether it be body language, eye contact, or lack thereof, or just the way he's saying things, that is sort of like giving off this, for lack of a better term, a douchey vibe. Yeah. And I think that makes someone a little less mistrusting than someone like Karishma, who will give you that eye contact. We see her in that scene with Jamal, where Jamal's like, okay, you're safe. And she almost gives him prayer hands, like, oh, thank you. Thank you so much. Almost like giving off this idea of subservience. Like, I owe you my life in this game. And I mean, it makes sense. I mean, that's sort of the role you want to play and the way you want to act. Whereas maybe Dean, and being a bit too cool for school, is coming across as guarded and maybe keeping some secrets, which make him more threatening if there's this chance that he could flip back over on the other side.
Yeah, and indeed, it looks like Dean is absolutely dead in the water here if it's not for Kellee and her Moment of inspiration, which was another really great, a really great moment on the show. Because like I feel like rarely do you feel like you get like a moment in these confessionals that's like real, where it's like someone like, but like in the moment she has this idea and she's got an idol that's going to expire. It's one of the Island of the Idol treasures she picked up, and she doesn't want to let it go to waste. Like, why would you want to let an immunity idol go to waste? And she doesn't feel threatened at this tribal council, so she gets an idea. What if I give it to Dean? Not play it for Dean, but give it to Dean. And this is one heck of a risky. This is a calculated risk here. If we're talking calculated risk, this is a big one.
Yeah, I mean, it's very ironic. I don't know if Janet told her the lesson, but that she is specifically talking about this because A, there's the thing that the plan that she makes, but B, it's her like also ensuring her own safety, because as she points out, the big con to this is, okay, what if I give the idol to Dean? We pull a Ben Driebergen and everyone votes for Dean, and then Dean plays the idol but then votes me out.
Right.
Then I'll be a complete sucker. And so her other like contingency plan is, okay, if I convince Noura, hey, Dean is voting for you, which up to the point that Kellee approaches Dean, that's what Dean's thinking. Mm-hmm. Dean thinks the vote is against Noura, and so he's going to vote for Noura. So if she tells him, hey, if Dean has an idol, of course now she knows Dean has an idol because she gave him one.
Right.
If Dean has an idol and he votes for you, you're gone. So maybe if you throw a vote onto, in this case, Jack, that'll cause a tie, and then we'll vote Jack out. And I think it's such an interesting strategy. There are repercussions of it that I want to talk about that maybe makes me like the move a little bit less. What I find so interesting about this, and this is what I wanted to allude to earlier, is I found out through my exit press with Jason that Kellee was probably his closest ally.
Okay.
And so it's really interesting to me. I really think this move was predicated on the fact that Jason was gone.
Okay.
Because if you think about it, if you're from Kellee's perspective and you say, my number one ally is gone, I need to find a new number one in this game. Hey, here's this guy who knows someone who I know. We made a pretty good personal connection. And if I end up saving him here, he's loyal to me, at least for a little bit. I think this was a gesture to make Dean Kellee's number one ally, to find that new Jason. And from that perspective, I could see, because the big debate that's been going on the past 24 hours or so is, did Kellee really need to do this? And if you use that logic, she definitely feels like she should have, from her perspective. If she's shoring up for a merge and she needs someone she could ride or die with, she lost that person. She needs a new one. I need Dean by my side, and if he's in trouble now, I need to make sure he makes it through that tribal council no matter what.
Yeah, it's a really fascinating move, and I like that you mentioned Noura here, because like apparently Noura we don't get a lot of how Noura plays into this vote in the episode, but it's pretty clear that she does, because we see when the votes come out, it's not Kellee votes for Dean. At the end of this episode,
she covers her tracks nicely.
I know like a lot of people may not just like pay attention to that part when people are putting up the votes, because like obviously you'd think like, why wouldn't it be Dean and Kellee who voted? But it was Noura, right? Noura was the one who did this. So obviously there's some kind of conversation that went on there. And it makes great sense if the assumption is like everybody's telling Dean, oh, it's Noura, you're gonna vote for Noura, right? It's got to be Noura. Like there's a reason for Noura to be a little bit worried here, and it makes perfect sense for Kellee to maybe work with Noura and build a bond with Noura, someone who's going to be sticking around after the merge. And maybe once she gets to the merge, is she going to be as big of a target anymore? Maybe because she's so unpredictable and she's been throwing names out there, but maybe not because she's Noura. Like it's tricky to know where Noura stands because she's Noura.
And in that way, she has actually, protecting two people, not just one. And that now Noura feels indebted to her. And it's also a really nice, we talk in Big Brother all the time about the idea of the hinky vote of, oh my God. And I'm sure the big mystery coming back from Tribal Council is, okay, who was the second vote for Jack? And now Kellee technically didn't do it. So, she doesn't need to lie about it. And knowing Noura, again, if she's the what you see is what you get, she'll probably say that she voted for Jack. And, that can go one of two ways. Either that really alienates Noura from the rest of Vokai as, oh my God, this is someone who would vote against us. Like she's clearly not Vokai strong. Or it's something that, just sort of gets erased water under the bridge. Okay, that was just a freak thing from Dean with the idol. Let's move forward. Either way is a win-win for Kellee.
Yeah, and I liked, and you know, who knows whether or not this is intentional, but when like looking at Kellee's vote when she votes for Dean, like it's a very like. It's a vote that just the way it's written kind of stands out, and it's like identifiable. Like that's clearly not how I wrote Dean's name. It's like with this mashup, like capital letters and lowercase letters, and like I feel like going back later,
Kellee is too neat to be able to use different types of typesetting.
Yeah, like going back to it later, it's like he's like, yeah, no, I definitely voted. I was the one who had the lowercase e in there. Like it's like that's
it's a detail. But the one thing I will say though is, so when I talked with Jack. Mm-hmm. And granted, a lot of stuff that happens with Exit Press might be done in hindsight, because obviously now Jack is a juror, now he's seen what happened. But at least what he told me was that as soon as he saw that second vote for Jack, he knew Kellee was behind it. Mm-hmm. He thought that maybe she was the second vote. He didn't realize that Noura was the second vote. And apparently he said that because it was palpable how close her and Dean were. So if Dean did play an idol, he figured, okay, either he did it or it came from someone like Kellee. Mm. So we know that he figured that out. I'm very intrigued to see if other people are onto that as well. Because if that's the case, as much as we might be commending this move from Kellee as sneaky to the point where she has this fantastic shocked face, to the point where Nora's turning to her of like, oh my God, this is crazy, right? She's like, oh, but yeah, absolutely. Mm. I mean, if people know that or have suspicions that she's the one that could have done it, then that really puts her in hot water.
Yeah. All right. So it sounds like we're starting to talk about some tribal council stuff. We've been doing it for a while. So let's just get right into it here, because there is so much that goes on in tribal council. Right. And let's get into it right after this. Okay, so we're back, and the tribal council, I said it at the beginning of the episode, this is one of my favorite tribal councils, I mean, all season long, but probably one of my favorites. And we don't even really get into the whole, like, the craziness of the vote that happens, because it's all about this great, this great conversation about an all-women's alliance. And it starts with Jamal being very concerned, and Noura kind of throwing out throwing out Jamal's name. And there's this moment at tribal council where Jamal's just kind of like pressing her, and it comes out like, yeah. I mean, it's crossed my mind. Like everything's crossed my mind. Like, why wouldn't this cross my mind? And it really sets up this moment where, there is a concern in Jamal's head where, like, okay, like maybe it's me, maybe I'm a sucker here, like, because who knows what's going on? Like, that's why it's a blind side. You don't know when it's coming until after it comes. So maybe there is something going on here. But I do love that it starts with Kellee, and Janet has it too, where we get into this discussion about women's alliances. And it's Jeff asked the question, and I wrote down the question here. And let me ask the question to you. Is fear of an all-women's alliance because of the seismic cultural shift of how we view gender? What do you think?
I mean, listen, I totally can see where Jeff is coming from in terms of, as Krishman talks about, Survivor is often a microcosm of society, and especially with the age that we're living in. That being said, I feel like if that was the case, I mean, this show has had strong female characters going all the way back to season 1. I personally do not know if it's necessarily specifically emblematic of the times. I personally feel, and Dalton Ross, another Survivor journalist, came out with a great recap, as he usually does every week, of this past episode, where he brings up this really great point where I don't think fear of a women's alliance is based on, where society is at this time. I feel like fear of a women's alliance is based on past precedent. Because if you think about it, I mean, what Kellee is making is such a salient point that there's all this talk in nearly every season of women's alliance. And in terms of women's alliances, we have seen the Black Widow Brigade, and then we've in Micronesia, and then we've seen alliances in like Vanuatu and One World, even though you could argue that those seasons were divided by gender initially.
Right.
It was even, and I mean, you could say whether it was a gender divided alliance, an alliance based on gender, or an alliance based on original tribes. So, I mean, the actual evidence of one is far, dwarfed by the actual suspicions of one. But when you look at something like the Black Widow Brigade or even, Kim's alliance from One World that proved to be very successful, that really sets paranoia going on in people's heads immediately after those seasons. And unfortunately, it's a self-perpetuating cycle where if a women's alliance is mentioned every season, hey, guess what? If you're a player coming into the season, you're going to be thinking about a women's alliance because you just heard talk about a women's alliance on the previous season.
Yeah.
Unfortunately, I think it's based on precedent without lack of concrete evidence. And I do appreciate Kellee really trying to stop that narrative in the moment. So I personally, as beautiful as, I think it is about movements like Me Too and Time's Up, really bringing about larger conversations about gender roles that have really, conversations that have lied dormant for years at this point. I do think in this particular instance, female alliances are less so based on what happens on the outside world and more so based on, okay, I know Survivor. I know that there's always talk about a women's alliance, even though for the most part it doesn't happen.
Right.
What complicates this issue even more, Fox, is that there kind of is one.
Exactly right. Exactly right.
And that's what I feel like makes this issue so much more incredibly complicated than the one from last episode. I know it's a bit like apples and oranges comparing conversations about race and gender, but I feel like last episode, I think we're all pretty much in agreement of what Jack said was wrong. Here's why it was wrong. They break it down. Here, yes. I think that, the way that Jamal certainly says things are not obviously the most squeaky clean. I do, the whole thing about, like, I work at a K-9 school, so I can see the power that women have when they're together. I would not say is the most, like, empowering statement for your argument. But at the same time, he does have reason to fear in this moment because he has heard, accurately so, that Noura was trying to bring the women of this tribe together with Dean to vote him out. So it's this very weird dichotomy where I feel like Kellee is completely right in this systemic fear of women's alliance is invalid. But at the same time, this is kind of a fear on Jamal's part that is a bit substantiated because something in this case did actually come together a bit.
Yeah. And the all women's alliance, it's not just Survivor, it's Big Brother as well. And it's just like, it's just such a, it's been there. Like you said, it is something that has happened in past seasons. And, it's very curious to me that, because it happened once in Micronesia, I think that's probably the big one that everybody, thinks of, like you said, the Black Widow Brigade there. That it just like it's been in everybody's head for so long, like there's like such a fear. And I really love the point where it's like no one fears the all guys alliance. Like, why is that not? And we've seen that before, right? I think like Blood versus Water. I think was it the first one that we saw, or maybe the second one, the Culpepper one. Was where they started an all male alliance.
Yeah, and we've even seen seasons where 3 out of the 4 men in the final 4 were men, or like we've seen seasons or seasons like Nicaragua where 3 men sit at the end. And yes, you might have all male alliances like the 4 Horsemen in Fiji, but I feel like paranoia and suspicion of an all-male alliance, to Kellee's very valid point, is much less rampant than fear of a women's alliance. For some reason, and I feel like it's unfortunately, again, due to those identities and stereotypes that have been ingrained in the difference in genders for years, that it's like, oh, women can't be trusted because they're catty and they'll come together behind your back, whereas guys, they'll tell you the truth, they'll bro down, which we know is not the case whatsoever. Whatsoever. Women and men can be equally duplicitous, to the point where we talked about Noura and Janet, who are 2 of the most sincere characters this season, and both of them are women. I feel like, unfortunately, this is an example of stereotypes working very badly. And I also realize the optics and, 2 guys talking about this. I very much encourage people to check out the commentary from former female players and females from the fan community as well, because as Janet says here beautifully in her monologue, they have lived in experiences that shows this bias happening. And, it's something that is so systemic that I am so glad that Kellee acknowledged. It's something that has been going on a lot in the Survivor community for years in terms of discussion, and it has finally been brought to the forefront. It just sucks that, it's something where after all this stuff, Jamal then says, okay, Jeff, can you please ask Noura if she was going to have a women's alliance? And Noura says, well, I was. So it's one of those things that, like, I wouldn't say it invalidates Kellee's argument, but it's tough when, his suspicions are confirmed after they are, promptly rebuffed by Kellee in that moment.
Yeah, yeah, yeah. That is unfortunate, but I think that the conversation that just happened there is just it's a really, like I said, like last week's conversation. Like, this is a really important conversation to have.
Yeah.
It's the perfect place and time to have it. And I'm really glad that they brought up several points, even if Noura kind of gets in the way here a little bit, as Noura tends to do. But
and I think even Jamal is someone who says, like, I totally agree with, the intention behind that. And that's the thing as well, as I think this cast is just such good storytellers across the board.
Yeah.
And I think this is an example of a story, even if it is sort of a perspective. I think Kellee does a great job of articulating her argument. I feel like Janet does a real powerhouse job here, where for her, it's less so about this idea of, women's alliance and more this idea of, like, hey, don't assume that we're just going to bond because of gender. I look at people for humans. And she also makes this really interesting argument as well about, this idea of, in order to empower women, it needs to come from all sides.
Yes.
I do feel like there's an unfortunate stigma against this idea of feminism as of late, of like, oh, it means that women want to be better than men, when really what Janet is alluding to here and what the common sense argument is, no, they just want to be on equal footing. And while there are so many strong, independent women who are working to make that a possibility, it needs to be accepted from all sides. And that's what Janet is sort of alluding to here, is you need to earn your respect, your dignity, your position. You need to earn who you are as human beings to each other. In a perfect world, that would not matter with gender. So to, foist that construct on us that we're only working together because we're women and not because I want to bond with someone on a human level is a very, just skeptical way of viewing things.
Yeah. I mean, for sure that this is probably, maybe a new angle to the conversation and a new venue for the conversation. But these issues are not new. Like the things that we're talking about here, like none of this is new. This goes back. I mean, certainly before either of us were born. Like it just, it's a very systemic thing. And I'm glad that I'm just glad that Survivor is talking about it, and it's doing it in a very seemingly respectful way, in a positive way, in a way that like helps with the conversation and doesn't get in the way of the conversation. Or
and that's the thing as well, is that I think what's very key and what might encourage to the tone that some of these conversations take is Jeff talks about the fans at home, and Jeff has very much been into this idea of like kids watching the show, this being a family show. And Jeff says that when you have young people watching the show, they're gonna view lenses through the way that they're expressed on the show. That's one reason why I'm really happy with this cast as well, is because they represent so many different backgrounds. Vince talked about it in that this is people have been so inspired by the Southeast Asian community to have a representative on the screen. I can imagine how there may be little girls who their eyes have been opened to the conversation based on what they see. Could a 30-year-old woman say, okay, yes, I absolutely know this is happening? Totally, because that's an experience they live every day. But if it comes to inspiring those to learn from Survivor, even though they're not on the island, and try to impart those virtues in their own life, I feel like it is a very valuable teaching moment that is, as is brought up, like very much oddly surrounded in this game, where again, yes, it is so wrong to outright say like, oh yeah, they're working together because they're women, but at the same time, you have to really balance that paranoia of like, okay, they could be working together, and in fact I just heard that there was a coalition against me, so I'm not entirely sure how to balance my suspicion with biases that are inherent from our society. Great points. I want to talk about the vote real quick. I mean, we've talked a little bit about it already. Obviously a bunch of votes go on Dean, they're all invalid. Jack gets 2 and he goes home. The interesting thing here, aside from the idol play that Kellee and Dean make together, is Jamal's response to it, where he plays his idol, and not just playing his idol, but playing his idol for Noura.
which is another like really eye-opening move. And I'm very curious to know what you think about this.
Yeah, this is bananas. This is absolutely crazy. Because, again, look at the beginning of this episode where Noura's like, oh, Jamal is such a huge asshole. Cut to like 40-something minutes later where she plays out. She's like, oh, my God, thank you. Wow. I mean, I'm sure she was absolutely stunned.
Of course.
I mean, I'm sure, again, we'll find out from Jamal at some point as to what the logic was behind it. My assumption was he had assumed that it would be, like we had mentioned before, unanimous on Dean, with Dean voting for Noura. I think his greatest hope is, okay, if I want to guarantee that Vokai makes the merge, my plan is let me play my idol on Noura. That erases all the votes now. We start clean slate, and then we just all vote for Karishma. And maybe he would try to like start spreading the whispers after that as they go into a revote. But yeah, it's absolutely crazy. It's shades of Dan playing an idol on Angelina in terms of idols making strange bedfellows of like, hey, if it works towards the common good, sometimes you'll, as Noura says, like the two big personalities will find themselves working for a common cause, and as a result, doing things we would not initially suspect.
Yeah, it's such a bold move. And, we've seen it before where, going back to like heroes versus villains where, Parvati plays two idols for two different people, in a moment where she could play it herself. And it's just like it's the ultimate survivor baller move here. But it just, for me, like, I think playing the idol is the right move here. Like, if all those votes are going to be invalidated, like, who knows where it's going? But to play it on Noura, that just like, ooh, that seems like he's acting on old information. If Dean is going to play an idol, is Dean really going to follow through with your plan? Like,
I don't know. Yeah, and that's the thing is that like I maybe he underestimated Dean and he just thought, okay, Dean was just going to go forward, and maybe they knew that, okay, he purposely drew all the votes onto himself, so he's going to play the idol. But I do love Karishma's reaction to it as well, of like, she is grateful, but then when the votes come in, like, she feels genuinely remorseful that Jamal wasted his idol on her.
Yeah.
Like, oh, that's too bad. I'm so sorry. When like, she could have very easily gone home in a different scenario had Jamal not played his idol on her.
It very well could have been. But like, it's all the better that she was kind of in on the plan, and she gets the idol played for her anyway. It's like best of both worlds. I want to know what that's like. I want someone to play an idol for me someday. So yeah, it's I'm very curious moving forward about this. You said it with Jack kind of seeing this relationship that Dean and Kellee have. I'm very curious to see how, we know how Detective Dean operates, but how about Detective the rest of Lairo, and figuring out how this happened, because there are two votes there. Someone did it. And maybe, my question was, are they going to be able to keep it secret? But maybe not. If Jack saw it, everyone else is probably seeing it too. Who else is he working with? It looked like Dean was working with Jack, so it didn't come from Jack. Jack's gone.
And I guess, and I mean, it could also be the thing where, yes, maybe Kellee feels Dean is in debt to her, but it could easily be a situation where if Dean feels like he's in trouble, he can do just what he did at Tribal Council with Noura and try to throw Kellee under the bus by being like, hey, this was her idol. So it's a weird relationship where, like, yes, I feel like Kellee is the one who holds power over Dean, but Dean is not completely powerless here.
Yeah, and
he has the information.
I really did like that move too. To not to go back to the Tribal Council, but when Dean did call out Noura, where even if Dean knows he is safe, he is still playing the Tribal Council game, and he's still, he's putting Noura on the hot seat, and I love it. I love that by him, to throw it, because he needs a wrench in there somewhere. Moving forward, old Lairo is not going to come back together in the way that would that would help his game. So he's got to do something with Vokai.
Yeah, you never know. Again, this cast continuously surprises me. So if they come back next week and they're like, great, Lairo versus Vokai, like, I would be stunned. But then again, if you have like a David versus Goliath scenario where, like, for the most part, I know they voted out Elizabeth, but the Davids, despite coming from such different allegiances, were like, yeah, we'll all work together and pursue forward. So who knows? We could see a Lairo uprising here, especially, if getting rid of Jack, it seemed like someone who was very social very well liked with a lot of Vokai players. What did you think, by the way, about the choice to gun for Jack instead of Jamal? I'm sure from an edit perspective, we were all a little surprised it wasn't Jamal, especially to your point, the aforementioned, like, I feel so safe tonight comments. Like, that's classic right before a fall. What do you think about the choice for Kellee, I guess, as the dictator of this vote here, to go for Jack specifically over Jamal?
Yeah, I actually liked it. I liked it, and the reason why I like it is because I think that Jamal is probably going to be an easier player to kind of form a consensus around, that we need to get him out. Where I feel like Jack kind of has like this more easygoing kind of thing, where like he doesn't come across as like a strategic mastermind. Like, yeah, he'll win an immunity here and there, but like, I feel like Jamal is someone who is like, even maybe more so than Jack, like has a lot of great, bonds with people, a lot of good strategic moments, even though he had like these, some friction here with Kellee in this episode, and with Noura. I just view him, I view Jamal as a bigger threat to win the game than I would view Jack as a threat to win the game. And that's just, that I think is kind of the tiebreaker there.
Yeah, well, I also wonder if it's a matter of, obviously, you know that someone like Noura is not keen to work with Jamal later on. So maybe that's going to always, put Jamal one position below you on the totem pole. It's just so interesting because you have this confessional where Kellee's weighing her options, and she's like, yeah, Jack is someone who really trusts me. And again, you would think that, yes, keep that person who can trust you. But I guess to that point, again, every strength in Survivor can be seen as a weakness, and vice versa. Jack being so social and that being able to trust her works the other way as well, where, oh my God, he's so well connected that he can jump around more easily than Jamal, which makes him a bit more dangerous. It's just such an interesting decision. Maybe there's something about the merge as well, and that, he's a very athletic guy. Maybe she can fear that he'd be a threat after the merge and go on a challenge run. I'm still trying to crack into that rationale, but I find it very interesting that, she had a clear shot of, I guess, not only between the two of them, but basically any target. Yeah. And she chose to go for Jack specifically.
Yeah, and we'll see next week how that works out. Whether it was the right move or the wrong move, we'll figure it out then. I think we need to wrap it up here. We've been going on for an awful long time. But I want to, first of all, thank you so much for joining me here today. It's been an absolute pleasure. Some great insights from you. Before you go, you want to tell people where they can find you and your great columns and interviews?
Absolutely. So every week on parade.com, I do exit press with the person most recently voted out. I've done some allusions to my exit interview with Jack this week, which I highly recommend people check out. He, unfortunately, I don't think had as many game moments shown as he probably wanted to. So we gave a lot of insight as to his own personal strategy. He also talked a lot about how Jack, I believe about 5 or so years ago, unfortunately lost his father. And he has this moment in a Ponderosa video because one of the big surprises on top of all the surprises from that tribal council, Jack is the first member of the jury. And in his Ponderosa video, he talks about how becoming a juror actually allowed him a bit of a moment of emotional reconciliation to realize exactly how he has digested his father's loss and, how that's affected his life. And it's really beautiful. And I always love talking with the guy. Again, he's an absolute ray of sunshine, which unfortunately I think is one of the reasons why he left. So be sure to check that out. You can always go to parade.com/tag/survivor to check out all the stuff that I'm doing. As I mentioned, a couple days ago, I put out an interview with Jamal that gave his side of that really powerful scene from last week. I highly encourage people to check that out. Jamal just, he really gets into his own reasoning behind things, the outside perspective as to things as well, and his reception to a lot of the, the community's response. And, it's really well done. You can check out the RHAP B&B on robhasawebsite.com. Again, myself, Liana Boris, and a guest get together, and we do a lot of silly things. There's a lot of silliness, even around very serious subjects, important subjects that are talked about on Survivor. The other big thing that I do, speaking of island-based shows, I am on a podcast called Down the Hatch on postshowrecaps.com.
Oh, yes.
An episodic Lost rewatch podcast that myself and Josh Wigler, who is another great Survivor journalist and Survivor podcaster, we're going week by week through the episodes. Very comprehensive. If you think this is long, we go for about twice as long. every week on an episode of similar length. But Lost is one of my favorite shows of all time. It got me into network drama. It's an incredibly beautiful character-driven story, in my opinion, and Josh and I have so much fun there. So if you're a fan of Lost as well, be sure, and you've watched it all the way through because it is a spoiler-filled rewatch podcast.
Yes.
Be sure to check that all out on postshowrecaps.com. And you can always follow me for all the stuff I'm schlepping out there in the internet populace at a Mike Bloom type.
Yes, definitely check that out. Check all that out. Also, I read the Jamal interview. Definitely go seek that out. That is some quality. I think I retweeted it, but parade.com, it's all there, right? And check out the Jack interview while you're there. And if we want to follow you on social media, we follow you
at a Mike Bloom type on Twitter, and I think Instagram. I'm not much of like a picture poster. My wife sort of takes over we have a 6-month-old son, and my wife has sort of taken over the picture duty, so I sort of just like nod and get tagged on them, but I'll occasionally post stuff from time to time. I'm not the best photographer in the world. I definitely value my writing skills more than my photography skills, so I still like it though. It's fun to be a part of the platform. So if you want to follow me on that, so be it. And I appreciate, of course, all the support everyone has had throughout this season, and for you as well, Fox, for having me on. This has been an absolutely awesome time, and I thank you so much for having me become a part of the Survivor Bros family, as it were.
Yes, absolutely. Glad to have you here, and for sure we're going to have you back if you'll do it with us, so we'd love to have you back. While you're following Mike, you may as well follow me at Fox Van Allen on the Twitter and the Instagram, all those good spots. And while you're following things and liking things and subscribing to things, why not subscribe to the Survivor Brothers podcast? You can do that on any of your favorite podcasting apps, Google Podcasts, Apple Podcasts, Spotify, TuneIn, wherever you want to do it there. So please do that. And if you like us, please leave a review. A nice one, preferably, but any review will do, I guess. We'll take the content.
Considering that, the discourse within the castaways of this season has been, even around complicated subjects, has been kind and courteous. Mm-hmm. Have that reflect upon your own reviewing as well.
Please. Yes, it's a good point. Good point, as always. All right, so listen, again, thank you so much for being here. We'll have you back as soon as we can, and hopefully all you viewers will be back here next week where we find out exactly what the heck Lance has been up to. So stay tuned for that, and we'll be talking to Merge and all that great Survivor stuff. So until next time, goodbye everybody.